And we'll move on to the next item, which will be a discussion of Marty. So, Assistant Superintendent Chamberlain.
Mr. President, Commissioners, I'm excited that you have the opportunity this evening to hear the draft plan that's been prepared for the RiverFIRST effort. This really is a combination of things. It's establishment of a vision, a revised and updated vision for the river corridor, as well as an implementation framework. And we have the consulting team here, both on the design side as well as the finance advisory side. And many of you have been involved in a couple of meetings that have preceded this one with the community. We had a steering committee meeting this morning and a community meeting last evening. Some great questions, some great comments, both critical and in favor, and just really tremendous energy that's developed around this project, and it's an exciting one. So I want to introduce Mary DeLate, who's been the project manager of this effort, and ask her to give a few words and introduce the team. Mary.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. The report that you have in front of you, as well as the presentation that you're going to see, is a reflection of a 5-month collaboration between KVA Architects, Tom Leader's studio, and HR&A Advisors, who are the finance advisors. It is the culmination of a year-long process, starting with the design competition and going through the MRDI. It was literally 1 year ago, or give or take a week, that all of this began. But most importantly, I think it's a milestone in a much, much longer upper riverfront transformation. And assuming on the decisions that you choose to make in November and December, there will be ongoing community engagement, ideally development of projects, and a coordinated capital campaign. There's just one or two things that I wanted to bring to your attention about this report. There has been a tremendous outpouring of support for this project. And if you look toward the end, we have letters from 40 different individuals, institutions, and organizations up and down the river and beyond, which we've included in this report. And I also wanted to say they keep coming in. Just yesterday we received a letter signed individually by all the city council members from the city of St. Paul, who not only support the endeavor but also want to work collaboratively because, of course, they've got their Great River Project going on and see great synergy. So I just wanted to draw that to your attention. I hope you have a moment to go through the report because, of course, tonight you will see an abbreviated version of what the design team and the finance team has been putting tremendous energy into over the last 12 months. And there's many, many dimensions to this project that I think you'll find quite interesting. So, having said that, I'd like to introduce Candace Damon and Danny Fuchs from HR&A, and then Sheila Kennedy, Front of Yolich, and Tom Leader from the respective design offices.
Thank you, Mary. Good evening, Commissioners. We'll try and, for the, I guess, about half of you that have seen this before and half who haven't, I think we're going to try and hit a happy medium on speed, and I would invite you to interrupt if we're going too fast and ask questions from whatever format you would like. We begin by noting that this is an initiative that is not being advanced as a standalone activity, but rather fits into a context that includes the great strides that this city has made in cementing its position as one of the city's medium-sized but wonderful and vibrant cities. It stands on the shoulders of the previous generation's initiatives, and it speaks to the opportunities and challenges that this city is likely to face in the coming generation. We begin by noting that for those of us who are outsiders, the New Yorkers, the Berkeleyites, the Bostonians on the consulting team, I think all of us think, when we think of the city, we think of its parks and open spaces. Your Parks and Open Space Network is central to the brand of this city, and this initiative, we think, advances that brand and strengthens you as you face the economic and social challenges of the 21st century. Second, it builds on the great success that you've had on the riverfront and in the downtown area just south of the area that we're talking about tonight. Over the course of the past 30 years, the public sector has invested something like $315 million in sites in and around the downtown waterfront, which has leveraged almost 6 times that much in private investment, a leverage ratio that, while not unprecedented, is certainly extremely successful when you look at other kinds of city transformative efforts around the country. And finally, it's an effort that is very much advanced in the context of the city's efforts to rethink land uses in this entire portion of the corridor. It is the parks framework that will undergird the rezoning and reexamination of land uses above the falls along the riverfront. The design team is going to show you, is going to look project by project at those projects that we think advance a larger vision and can also be advanced in the short term, which is to say that the strategy of this project is to opportunistically seek to advance an ambitious agenda that will likely be achieved only over a generation. An agenda that will, I think, completely transform the North Minneapolis waterfront, but that is going to take time to realize as a variety of public and private parcels get assembled and thought through, and the community continues to comment on design, and resources are assembled over a lengthy period of time. In order for that vision to be achieved, however, we think we need to identify and cost a first phase of work, a phase that is significant enough to indicate that something really special is happening, but small enough to be bite-offable and achievable in the short term. We think that first phase of work has to meet 4 criteria for success. First, it has to be able to establish that the projects that are advanced in the first phase are successful in bringing the diversity of people who live and work in the city to the river. It can't feel like that first phase is being advanced only for some particular group or groups of people. We have to see all of Minneapolis on the river in the first phase. And by doing so, that first phase has to foster advocacy for completion of the larger vision. Advocacy at elite levels and at grassroots levels, a coming together of the community to ensure that the vision gets built out. In doing so, one expects that the first phase should garner media attention, not just local media attention, but national and international media attention, because it is a city branding effort. And finally, the projects in the first phase have to demonstrate that a variety of public, not-for-profit, and private sector entities can actually get together, negotiate deals, and get projects built, indicating to the citizenry and the business leadership here that this plan can actually come off. The design team is now going to walk through the components of the plan from a design and vision point of view, and then I'll come back and talk to you about what we think the first phase is likely to cost and where sources of funding can be identified for both its capital and operating components.
Hi, I'm Tom. I have a bad voice. Excuse me. I'm Tom Leader, Sheila Kennedy. We're going to talk to you. You know, we've been working a long time, done a lot of work. We're going to talk to you briefly about the condensation of everything that we've learned. First, we'd like to review the principles, really, of the framework that's been established, and then the projects. Now, our first responsibility here is to the river and bringing people to the river, bringing the river back into the city. You see a map here, which is a map of the water. And what we mean by the water is all of the tributaries that are currently flowing into the Mississippi. There will be many of them becoming daylighted streams for biofiltration of stormwater. We're mediating a great deal of the pollution that's currently feeding from the watershed. And very importantly, in being brought to the surface, allowing new landscapes, new ecosystems, new biological diversity to multiply and become much greater and more resilient in the future. Those landscapes are supported by varying levels of soil moisture, and we can go on in more detail, but basically the position of landscapes in relation to elevation and water is being used to design the entire system. And this is the outgrowth of these habitat diversity. We will now have a corridor that works both north-south and east-west to complete the grand rounds, not only for people, but for all species, animals and so forth, to create a new flyway through the entire Mississippi corridor. And Sheila's going to expand on that.
Thank you, Tom. So we propose to make a comprehensive remediation of the city's stormwater system, to clean that water using natural processes, and then to use that water in the various different moisture gradients to create habitat to support the carrying capacity of the kind of very important national flyways that you see illustrated in this diagram. So it's not just about water moving and about birds migrating and animals moving. Of course, it's about people moving. A central concept of RiverFIRST is to bring the citizens of Minneapolis to the river. And you see in this diagram a series of transportation routes that form a mobility network based on loops, the simple concept of loops. Loops that are formed by a continuous north-south running trail system that will be an extension of the park trails with critical east-west connections that tie together north and northeast neighborhoods. Those tie-togethers we're calling knots, and we refer to these as knot bridges. We'll talk about them more in a minute. There's a comprehensive bicycle path system, and you see there in circles the kind of radius from any point on north and northeast neighborhoods. You could walk to the trails in under 15 minutes, you could bike there in 5 minutes, and you would have a world-class pedestrian and bike transportation system, trail transportation system. We also think that the city is made out of layers. In addition to the physical connection, there's connection to existing community resources in the form of local produce markets and community gardens. We want to create a network which supports these ongoing community activities with significant new urban agricultural resources. You see those indicated on this particular map. And you're fortunate enough to have a fantastic USGS internet site which provides 90 stream water monitoring stations. This is already in place in the state of just north of Minneapolis in the state here. And we propose to take advantage of that resource and pair that with social media to create a communication infrastructure, which would be a cell phone application that we propose be called River Talk. This would allow the youngest generation, and indeed all citizens of Minneapolis, to get information about the river, to coordinate events on the river, and we think there could be a very significant educational and interpretive public outreach that could be brought into the classrooms. What you see here are two proposed phasing plans. On your left, you see the 2 to 5 year plan. On your right, you see a vision plan, which would be a longer term, 10 to 20 years. Now, as Candace mentioned, our goal is to try to achieve the maximum impact in 2 to 5 years that we think can actually be achieved. And I want to just quickly walk you through that, and then Tom and I will talk about the sites in a little bit more detail, but this is a very compressed presentation. First and foremost is the new north-south running trails that you see here that will go all the way up to Camden Bridge and connect even northward to the northern Ashoka Park trails, coming down here on Marshall Street, the East Bluffs, coming down and looping back down again and connecting with the existing trail system and with a proposed Gateway Park. And there are critical east-west connections along these bridges. So we see this trail system as a fundamental, important part, a world-class, four-season trail system. We also think that it's very important to start making a very significant set of connections from North Minneapolis to the river. This is the 26th Avenue connection, the 27th and 28th Avenue. We'll talk about that in a minute. This is a new wetlands that's proposed with a connection here to the Perkins Hill neighborhood along Dowling Street, and then the port area, and coming back down to the East Bluffs and to Shearer Park. This is a lot to talk about in 10 minutes, but we're going to try to move through. Please do interrupt us if you have questions. We'll try to answer them. Talking first about the trail system. What you see here is the Plymouth Bridge here, the Broadway Bridge, and the BNSF Bridge here, and a trail system that's proposed in a series of loops, which we call river loops, which will create unprecedented connections back and forth across two sides of the river that really have been not accessible, readily accessible for bikers and pedestrians. You're looking here at the proposed new park at so-called working title Shearer Park. We'll talk about that. This image shows you a view of what the BNSF bridge could look like if that became much more friendly. That existing bridge were reappropriated for bicyclists and also for pedestrians. And then this is the Broadway Bridge, and you can see here the very light, delicate steel pedestrian bridge that we propose that would actually come across and connect these two sides. I apologize, I misspoke. This is the Plymouth Knott Bridge. This is up at North, just to show you how these trails would connect with northbound trails up at Camden Bridge. And I'd like to draw your attention to what we're proposing here, a series of floating islands called biohavens. These are material that are machined and made locally here in Minneapolis. The idea is that there's a matrix of recycled plastic, which is actually made out of water bottles, recycled water bottles, and this is a matrix in which plants can be grown in the water. And there are some very significant remediation figures of merit associated with each of these islands. These islands have been implemented in Montana by the Army Corps and in other sites. We propose to have them here, and I'll just share with you that each cluster of biohavens, and we have 6 in this plan, the root systems of the plants can bioremediate 32 kilograms per day of phosphors, which is the equivalent of about 1,600 gallons of dishwashing soap, just to put it on everyday terms. They can also remediate about 600 kilograms a day of nitrates, which is particularly important because, as we know, the river is currently impaired for nitrates. And this represents more than 225-pound bags of lawn fertilizer. So we feel that this would be a way to really clean the water and produce about 5 acres of new habitat that would significantly increase the carrying capacity for migrating birds and also other endangered species. I'm going to start talking about the next district. We've talked a little bit about the trails, the knot bridges, and the biohaven islands. Now we're going to talk about the connections to Farview Park. Here in this perspective, you're looking at an aerial view of Farview Park, which is a historical high point. This represents the extension of the 26th Avenue Bikeway, which extends west to Theodore Wirth, with a fishing pier that you see here at this end, and a trail system that moves along, at times rising above existing industrial operations and then landing again. Tom, do you want to continue to talk about this?
Yeah. The fundamental impulse here is to bring the north side down to the river. And if you look at this lower drawing, you know, when we stand up here, we wonder how can we do that? And so what we'd like to establish is 26th Street and 28th Street as a major framework for setting up a district which can be implemented over a period of time, infilling with urban agriculture, with ecologically related business, so they can grow with the changing economic situation.
Over the course of the last 4 months, the design team has contacted all the industrial business leadership along this reach of the river and spoken with a number of different CEOs. And here you see a view of this flyway bridge, which at times rises above, allowing the industrial operations, for example, you see here the gantry crane and the equipment of Lafarge, to continue to operate while moving the public safely over these crossings here. So we think about this as Minneapolis's own High Line, if you will, but this is better than the High Line because it's a spine that really supports conservation, and you have the Mississippi River here.
Shearer Park. What we're fundamentally trying to do is set this up as the urban welcome mat to the entire system of trails, of boating, and of kayaking on the river. And what we're proposing fundamentally is to recreate Hall's Island, which is an historic feature in the river, pushed out a bit more, and then inviting the river inside to create a more shallow backwater where people can get in and out of boats, where there can be a very large gravel beach and a very large bowl-shaped space, which is created by the embracing arms of Plymouth Avenue Bridge and a new bridge extending over to the island itself. So when you step into this space, you are in an unprecedented scale of this city, of a new beach and a launching point into the river itself. It's framed by development along the Sibley and the side street with the park-related and other supporting mixed-use projects.
So at this early stage of this proposal, the programming really has not even begun, but what we'd like to draw to your attention, Commissioners, is the character that we heard time and time again in community meetings, that people really would wish programming of the new park to be related in some way to the river. And so we're proposing a suite of program ideas which have yet to be validated, but include farmers market, local farmers market, community arts center, a kayak or canoe rental. We've spoken with operators who would be interested in bringing this facility to a site like this, and to really think about how recreation here could be related to the river in terms of recreation and in terms of education about the river.
One last thing I mentioned, we're very much aware of the seasons of the river, the levels, and we've looked at it in terms of how it's used from the lowest level of the fall and winter to the highest level of the flood in the spring. So we've created a receptacle that allows uses at all times of year.
You may remember that this year there was some significant flooding here in the 1980s at the Shearer Brothers site, and so we're trying to create a pervious surface that can absorb that and help mitigate the kind of higher floodwaters that we can anticipate with climate change in the coming years. This is a view of what that beach might look like with the kind of activity that we see happening there. You can see beyond Plymouth Bridge. Moving then to the north side wetlands here, I'll let Tom talk about this.
Well, we think it's time to make a proposal for the port, and so we're here to do it. Our idea is that we really think you can consolidate the port operations in the northern half of this very long strip along the Mississippi. We believe that there's a 20-acre site. If I can, whoop, oh gosh, excuse me.
I'll point.
You point.
You talk.
You point. I'll talk. That there's a 20-acre site to the south, which is the most inefficient storage of bulk materials in our view, that could be converted to a new wetland park that is connected very strongly to the north side by a bridge along 34th Avenue. And the purpose of this, and you see in the upper illustration of the view over the entire wetland, the purpose here is a few things at once. One is to create a massive new collection and remediation of stormwater from the entire north side, to create a very diversified and ecologically resilient new wetland system, together with upland meadows and for gathering spaces, and to create basically a destination really for the entire city in terms of ecological diversity. Now, the area to the north, basically, if you consider the cold storage building, one boundary, the question is, what happens to the north? There are a lot of scenarios really under consideration, and we can't imagine all of them. Well, we have probably taken the most extreme view. The landscape architects can't help it. What if that whole zone was park? What if you had a park that extended from Lowry Bridge really all the way to North Mississippi Park? It's a potential. In any case, we have a lot of material that's coming out of the wetland. We need to do some land forming in order to complement that excavation. What we're proposing, as you see in the lower illustration, is beginning on the far left, a major amphitheater slope that rises to a height of 30 feet, embracing the existing grain elevator as a new key feature where 5,000 to 10,000 people could gather for a concert. To the right of that, a major arrival and PV canopy at Dowling, which would power the entire electrical system of the park, a place where you arrive and there are concessions, cafes. You can stage an event for 500 people within that space. And the entire sort of architecture of the site is based on the idea of bins, which are basically a way of storing dredged material that we're going to need to process over a period of time until navigation stops. So what you're seeing here is the first evolution of a bin where as a ridge trail can traverse the entire zone along the backbone, along the railroad. Arms extend, and then we use the infield stored dredged material as it's being processed and transported. The potential for early settler and native agriculture, and the possibility of park rooms that are basically meadows for people to come in and use to back up their pickup with their cooler and and their beer and have a fantastic barbecue.
So what we're proposing is that this park could be built from what's currently thought of as a kind of a liability, the dredge spoils, the material that's removed from the river, and transform that into an asset and grow this park over time in a series of public river rooms that could have a variety of different topographies and programs.
And here you are. This is the new form of transportation that you'll all be enjoying soon. This is your experience within the wetland park. It's a new experience, and it's also old. This is what was here before. This has been restored from its original condition as an oxbow, and also the context that you all know of power lines, of the industrial heritage. Things have been brought together as a synthesis.
Mm-hmm. This story is really about what happens in this next century and how we can help to create, working very collaboratively with the city, with parks, and with communities, a major cultural shift, a major change in attitude towards the Mississippi River. And this is also about how Minneapolis, as a metropolitan city, can find a new way of coexisting with and sustaining a really dynamic living river system. This is a unique river. We don't need to tell you that. This is about transforming what was a backyard into a front yard and really creating a set of recreational and educational river resources in a river park system that really is commensurate with a national park system.
Last project we want to talk about is Gateway. This is an initiative that's being led by the Trust for Public Land, and RiverFIRST, the team, is supporting this in terms of its hydrologic connections and its ability to connect people down to the river itself. What you see in the lower image is the possibility of a major new riparian corridor on either side of Hennepin Avenue, which could frame the entry of people coming across that bridge and entering into the downtown, grown from the nature of the place, grown from the above-ground hydrology that is being brought up from the river itself, and bringing people then down to the river. And within the park space above, we're recommending that there be an above-ground hydrologic system which could embrace the entire watershed of the downtown and clean this water as an amenity and actually grow the park based on natural principles of forestation and emergent meadows.
Okay. Candace and Danny are now going to present their work on the financial plan for this.
I know the design team would like to spend more time with you and talk about the rest of the vision and the other projects that are imagined for subsequent phases of activity. We've focused tonight on what we think a first phase might be. That is, the collection of projects that we think collectively, by virtue of their ownership and their siting, transactions could actually be executed. These parks could get built, and they would succeed in strengthening Minneapolis's brand and bringing everybody who lives in the city and works in the city down to the riverfront. If the 5 projects that Sheila and Tom began by talking to you about, the riverfront trail system, including the extension of 26th and 28th to the river, the knot bridges, the biohavens, the Shira Park District, and the Northside Wetland Park were built as described, we believe the public costs of those capital projects would be something like $145 million, inclusive of a responsible contingency and soft costs. Now, there are some elements of those projects that are new, more difficult to build. We have less experience with them as a construction industry, and therefore we have shown those numbers with an additional 20% contingency, describing a range of capital costs of between $145 and $175 million, which we think is a reasonable estimate for what these parks are likely to cost if they're built in the short term. Those are numbers that have been vetted with a construction firm active in the area, and we think are reasonably reliable. The Trust for Public Land suggests that if you also built Gateway, that would add something like $20 million to the figure. It's a big number, but it's worth remembering that it's about half the public investment in the riverfront parks to the south of this area, and relative to some of the other infrastructure and civic investment projects that are being considered in the region now, it's not that big a number. It is a number that we think the experience of other cities, and indeed this city suggests, is achievable. We've seen over and over again in cities across the country that designs with this kind of strength attached to the passion of the community and its leadership actually attract capital. The capital in this case, we think, is likely to come from a variety of sources. You can't simply rely on the special levy that is the core of how the Parks Board is funded. We would suggest that you look at least these 6 sources of capital funding and think very carefully about which sources of capital funding are most likely to be useful for which projects, so you're not going back to the same well over and over again. For instance, it seems to us that legacy amendment funding, which this urban area, it seems to us, has received less of than it might have, is appropriate for the Northside Wetlands Park and for the restoration of Hall Island. It seems to us, on the other hand, that the more significant challenge that you're going to have is securing sustainable sources of operating and maintenance funding moving forward. I mean, while many cities have found that it's possible to raise the capital, they've also found that there are challenges to raising the operating and maintenance funds, and without having secured those funds, your investment is in many ways wasted. There's a spectrum of sources of operating funding that we look to because it's increasingly clear that the fiscal condition of states and cities across the country is that the general fund and even special levies like Support the Parks Board aren't adequate to sustain the kinds of visions of cities like this one. And there's going to be real challenges in finding operating funds for this park. It's not downtown, and therefore it's not going to have the ready access to sources of corporate and personal philanthropy that, you know, the Bryant Parks and the post office squares have. It does not traverse neighborhoods that are currently affluent. And this is not a city that's projected for near-term significant residential or business growth. So finding the sources of wealth, expecting to go to the corporate or the personal philanthropic community, and to be able to locate all of the operating funds that are needed is going to be difficult. Instead, we think that it's going to be necessary to, as with the capital, project by project, think about where sources of operating funds are likely to be. And in the short term, the levy that supports the Parks Board is likely to be the major source of operating funding. Because you're going to take time to develop these other sources of operating funding, and thinking through the first phase probably has to be cognizant of the fact that your existing resources, plus whatever levies and adjustments to the levies that you choose to advance, is the source of operating funding. Shortly thereafter, though, and in the near-term planning for the notion that real estate-related sources can be a major source of operating funding also, is, we think, worth thinking through very carefully. This, again, has been the experience of most other cities seeking other sources of operating funding. That real estate, the value that new parks create in terms of additional real estate development and higher value existing real estate development, that's something that this park ought to capture. It's creating that value. It should be sustained by the increment in value. And there's really 2 ways of getting at that. You can levy various kinds of special assessments on the increment in value, or you can actually develop your own publicly owned parcels and use the site disposition proceeds to help support the park. In the short term, and remember this is proposed for phase 1, all the market data that we've reviewed suggests that there are really 2 kinds of uses that could be appropriate for being developed on public land adjacent to the park, and that pencil from a development point of view. First, low to mid-rise residential, and second, kind of owner-occupied space. We show you the Coloplast building here, not to suggest that Coloplast is appropriate for the park, but that these are the kinds of entities that don't need to make money on development, that value being on the riverfront and want to occupy their own buildings to the extent that what they're doing is consistent with the mission of a park, are appropriate and do work as a market proposition. In either case, what you'd be looking to do is to develop public land in a way that it created an operating stream of revenue. So rather than selling it, ground lease it so that you're getting rent for the long term and you've retained the value of the land. Similarly, you can start to think about special assessment districts or housing improvement areas around the parks where real estate value might be created, and look to that as a source of operating funds. While we think that real estate is likely to be the single greatest source of operating funding, of new operating funding, it's worth looking at other sources too. This plan creates enormous environmental benefits for the neighborhoods that surround the river and for the city and the region as a whole, and some of those environmental benefits may be able to be monetized. For instance, you currently have a stormwater management fee that's applied based on how much impervious cover exists on a given site. If some of that cover were removed by virtue of how the park is proposed to be operated, the water were clean, the site is less impervious, then presumably you could share in the loss of stormwater management fees with the owner. So the owner benefits by paying less, and the park benefits by gaining a source of funding that otherwise would have gone to stormwater management fees. Neither of those two sources, real estate plus or three sources, the existing levy, real estate, and the stormwater management fees and other environmental levies, are likely to be sufficient. There will still need to be thinking about how these parks are programmed, whether events and catering and food and promotions and philanthropy and corporate support can also be levered to ensure that these new parks are maintained to the standard that you will want to see. Final slide, and then we're very interested in taking your questions. All of that begs the question of who is advancing these projects. It's a vision of sufficient scale and ambition that no single entity can be expected to take on all these projects. It will be a partnership of a variety of public, private, and not-for-profit entities. We would suggest that in the first phase, to the extent that these 5 projects resonate as a first phase, that the Parks and Recreation Board should consider taking the lead on the trail system and on the Shira Park District. The notion being the trail system is very much core to your current mission. You've assembled most of the land at the Shira Park District and are actively engaged in demolition there, and that those are 2 kinds of transactions with which the Parks and Recreation Board has experience and could lead, while looking to other entities to advance, lead, and manage some of the other initiatives that we've described. And we look forward to questions and comments.
Thank you very much. Okay, well,
Why, thank you. Commissioners, this is a study item tonight, and we are in an item a couple down. We are going to ask for a couple of actions that will cover some needs we have for the project over the next couple of months. But we really want to use this as an opportunity for you to engage with the design and the finance team, ask questions at your will. So I really encourage you to ask any questions that you do have.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Walensky.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm always have been thrilled to see all of this, all the steps that have come forward, and it's looking better and better all the time. What I really liked was that price tag that you put on it, and I thought, you know, that is so much less than one of those giant things that they build for those professional sports people. Wow! And look how many more people it would serve. So thank you for bringing that forward. It's very exciting to me, a non-sports person in that respect, to see something, because as a person who spent the last couple of weekends down on Boom Island with a kid with a fishing rod, this is much more where I'm likely to spend my time.
Thank you, Commissioner Walensky. Commissioner Kummer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question is about the biohavens, those floating islands. How do they actually clean the water, since the river has a regular moving current? And I've always thought of those islands as working in ponds, in a contained surface. Now, does it slow the water enough to clean? Does it, create a pool? What happens there? Because on its surface, I can't see how you can clean the water that fast as it's moving past.
Mm-hmm. The Army Corps of Engineers actually has implemented a fairly large biohaven, larger than the one that is contemplated here, of about 20,000 square feet in Montana, that's actually a bird nesting platform. There are myriad details, technical details, that we do need to look into about how the biohavens are attached, whether they be attached on piers or on the bridge foundations. And so we do appreciate your questions, and we do recognize the need for more research in the technical details. Let me briefly try to answer your question, Commissioner. The vegetation grows in the matrix. The root system goes down into the river. And around the root system, very close, is a layer, a microbial layer, essentially of bacteria. And that is sponsored by the root system. So even though the water is passing along the roots, the bacteria are feasting on some of those elements that the river is currently impaired for. We're working very closely with a nonprofit, Floating Island. It's a Floating Island Corporation nonprofit, and we're thinking that this can really clean the water with some of those very impressive figures of merit that I cited.
You can think of it as a floating sponge.
Yes.
Might be an easier way to conceive it.
A floating sponge.
A floating sponge.
Yes, with a faucet on it. Running.
A floating sponge that is not just absorbing water, but as water moves by it, the microbes are given a new dinner menu every time that the water is exchanged. That is the principle. This is an ambitious plan, and this team recognizes two needs that exist together. On the one hand, we really need to take steps, and Biohavens is but one of these steps, to really try to continue to improve the health of the river. That's really a very important thing. On the other hand, we also need to be very bold in thinking about the coming needs, not just of 2 to 5 years, but what will happen in 2050. And as you know, in Pool 8 and other pools, the Army Corps has been implementing islands, actual real physical islands, to help maintain habitat and to break wind. We think that the floating islands may be a very cost-effective and kind of powerful way to jumpstart the carrying capacity on the upper Mississippi River, as well as produce some cleaning.
Okay. I want you to understand that I certainly hope that this works, and it's a very fascinating idea. However, has it ever been done in a river?
The short answer is it has been done, but not in the systemic way that we're thinking about here.
Okay.
And there are elements in this plan, which is a 21st century vision, that have not been done before, because we see in this unique stretch of river an opportunity to do what no city really has done before. And so there will be elements that need to be vetted, tested, and ultimately evaluated, not only by the Board of Commissioners, but by our other collaborators. So we certainly want to recognize that, and I thank you for the question.
Oh, thank you.
Commissioner Kummer speaking as a horticulture professor.
Yes.
Hydroponics.
No, I
If you go to
understand
Bushel
that.
Boyd tomatoes, hydroponics, there's a trough of water with roots in it, and we flow a solution over the roots, and the plants actually prefer the flow.
Good.
It helps them grow.
There's some science behind that.
Vice President Young.
Thank you. Having been here now for a long time, I was fortunate in seeing some of the first schematics of the riverfront as it is now, 20 plus years ago. So this is extremely exciting. I want to thank you for your work. These are incredible, drawings, presentations. Your work has been vital, and it just, for me, makes me want to say to my constituents in the city of Minneapolis, remember where we started. And yes, it's a long-range vision, but this is for our children and our grandchildren. That's the sustainability part of this, this is the long-term projection. And I think that we have to, instead of thinking about, yes, thank goodness it's cheaper than building a professional ball field, and probably much more exciting for many of us. The money seems hard at this moment in time, but is very feasible. So speaking of that, I need you to go back about 4 or 5 slides where you had limits. And you had 3 limits, I think, of which one was the real estate value creation. And then it went so fast that I lost the others. And so can we...
Where, are we looking for?
It was right after not downtown, not
it's the
affiliated.
Not in a...
Yeah, and not a city projected. Yeah, there, down below. Okay. I do right. I do this multitasking stuff. Okay.
I think what we're saying, I think the operating funding lift is doable, just like the capital funding lift is doable.
Right.
It will not be as easy as it was for the High Line or Bryant Park or, you know, one of these other jewel-like downtown parks in a wealthy city in a wealthy neighborhood, for those very reasons. But it's doable, I think, by nature of the design that these folks have come up with. I mean, they're not going to be intensely used downtown parks surrounded by thousands and thousands of square feet of commercial space. And I think they've been very cost-effectively designed so that the environment does for you a great deal of what otherwise would have to be done by human beings. Nonetheless, there are some challenges.
Yes, of course, as always.
Right.
And I really want to thank you for especially the feature crossing between 26th and 28th and going over, and your acknowledgement of the agriculture and urban farming and urban the urban signature of what's happening over there with community farms and gardens and the urban agriculture. And but when you first showed us this in the first, you know, at the Walker and wherever, you talked a little bit more about the green corridor and the energy corridor, and it didn't quite come through in this. Is that still going to be, you did show an energy center somewhere that will provide electricity?
Yes.
Maybe for the amphitheater?
That's right.
that
I'll
part
allow
of-
Candace to find the slide. That's right. We still feel very much that the river itself can be a source of energy. We've looked into run-of-river turbines, and the current rate that the water is moving is actually not fast enough to really create a very large amount of electricity. So instead, what we're looking at are some solar installations. And you may know that Excel is also considering some solar installations on the northeast. So we think that it would be possible in the area that is currently the port to create a significant new model that would make park operations much more efficient. We think that we can have a much more sustainable park with less money spent on mowing of grass, on operations, and also things like lighting and park standards. All of these details are very important, and we need to develop them with you and the Parks Department much more closely. But you see in the lower perspective on this page a series of elements here, which are in fact photovoltaic or
Right.
solar panels, and there are a number of these.
Yeah.
And the idea is that each of these river rooms, which will be used for barbecues, picnics, family gatherings, all of these recreational and collective social amenities, could be powered by a bank of solar panels. I do believe that that this is a realistic ambition if this is the direction that the city and parks want to move forward in.
Thank you. It's great. That's what I want. Yeah.
Thank you, Vice President Young. Commissioner Vreeland.
Yes, thank you. I very much appreciate this. Perhaps we should call the Shear Brothers District the Horace Cleveland District. This really is
Hear, hear.
an incredible homage to the vision that created this park system of protecting our shorelines and protecting natural areas. And this is the area that kind of got missed out. So again, and also connecting B.F. Nelson, Boom Island, Shear Brothers is such a large and wonderful piece that allows us to do many different kinds of programming and activities and really incorporate nature and people activity in ways that could fit together, I think, well. So again, I'd love to hear more about how Boom Island is especially integrated, as well as B.F. Nelson, and I think we have lots of opportunities to do that. The stormwater utility fee, I think the way that it's monetized is that it's the more people do more with their stormwater and reduce the stormwater fees, the less money the city has to pay for the stuff that's hardwired anyway. So for a long-term strategy, unless something's different, it's just not going to be a source of income. It's kind of a losing strategy as it now. We want people to do good things with stormwater, but the more good things they do, the less money we have. So I just don't think we're going to be able to pay for it with that.
It's also, frankly, not a great deal of money, but I think that there are the environmental benefits of the plan. It is worth continuing to explore how you might monetize those for the benefit of the park.
And the greater connection would be that the city and Public Works has all kinds of stormwater problems that they need to solve, and this provides us the opportunity to use some of those fees to solve those collective problems. So that's a really good overlap. The 26th connection is something that we're already working on, and it's great to see it emphasized. The more that we can connect the north side, and again, you talked about a bus shuttle on the northeast. Again, we did a shuttle for the tornado, and I thought it was pretty successful. I mean, the idea of how do you get a larger portion of folks? It's a long way to Farview Park to the river, and that connection is beautiful, but it's a little long. And if you had some nodes, or some other transportation, and a place that's really fun and interesting when you get to the river there. So, you know, there's some stuff there, but in terms of the phasing, I think we have to have something really cool there that really establishes that, and 28th and the pieces and parts. You've done a marvelous job of trying to anticipate the slowness of some of the land use changes, and you've advocated for a both and. I don't know if both and works the way that we've had parks established before. So that may be our biggest challenge, is do heavy, dirty industries coexist well with parks, and how do we really define those borders? So I think that where those things meet may be some of our biggest challenges. And you know, if you're going to put a boat in the water where there's some heavy industry, that's not such a big deal. But if you're going to picnic there, or if it's opposite the investment that you make across the river, those will be great challenges. They continue to be great challenges. I really appreciate this process that the park board, the Marty process, and the city and HRNA have really looked at the many facets of this that we don't usually do. We don't usually go into how do we get the money for the master plan. And the city's been integrally involved, and the city, I think today is the first day that they've published it online, but they're looking at the feasibility of what can happen where in the upper river. And they've presented to some of us kind of the same kind of question of the both and where are the nodes of different kinds of activities and the actual zoning. So again, my thanks to my colleagues at the city for having these really dovetailed well. I think that's it for, I mean, there's so much stuff here. It's so good. We really want to do it, and we want to have our first project be very successful so that it really establishes the citywide vision for why we need to continue. So again, our first steps will be very critical in this, as you well know. So we want a success to start it, and I think we're starting it now. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Vreeland. Commissioner Olson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few comments. I think the land bridge is extremely important from Farview Park down to the river, but I'm not sure if it's enough. It's 2 blocks of bringing the neighborhood to the river, or the river to the neighborhood, but there's still a large portion of the north side that is completely disconnected because of the freeway, and I'm not sure why we haven't looked at ways to bring more of the north side, or as much of the north side as we can, to the river to the north side, by doing multiple land bridges, similar to what they've done in Duluth and other areas.
Commissioner, you raise an excellent point, and this is really, Tom and I should have mentioned on a map that we see that the land bridge in Farview Park is an important civic formal gesture of connection. But in addition, there are other connectors which we have failed to mention, which you will see in your plan. We're talking long-term about improving the connection on Broadway that goes across the highway. There's the 26th Avenue and the 28th Avenue corridor that we've already talked about. There is the Dowling Street extension and a new bridge at Perkins Hill, as well as a new improved connection at 41st Street. So there's a suite of new connections that connect north side, north to south across the river. Farview is a centerpiece, but there are multiple connecting points.
The one at 34th Street is pretty key. It's picking up another very public node within Perkins Hill, and it's a pedestrian bridge across the entire highway.
You see that right here.
Right, but what I'm saying is I don't know as though that's enough. I mean, a pedestrian bridge is great and those types of things, but, you know, if you have either a longer land bridge, you know, linear,
No, these bridges are the start of something. So you make a bridge, and then you fill in between. You make another bridge. You know, I would love to see the whole thing covered the entire length, but there may be ways to. The key is to get the first thing dropped across there that's new.
Okay, yeah, and I agree with you. I think we should try and cover as much of it as we can. And then the Northside Wetlands Park. You know, you've been down to the river at very hot times of the year, I'm sure. The location of Dowling in the riverfront, correct?
Yes.
Did you notice anything when you were down on the river, Dowling in the riverfront, that would prevent you from wanting to be there?
It's a little stinky, I think, is she's trying to say.
It's GA, yes. Mm-hmm.
And there's company, and it's not a bad company, but they have a lease there, and they've made improvements to that site at considerable cost to themselves, who I believe is probably going to be there because they have a lease for quite a long time. But I got to tell you, I mean, it's enough to make you gag. And with that there, I just don't know how people are going to want to be there. Because I go down there, I do business with folks down there, Minneapolis Oxygen, and I go down to get a CO2 tank, and literally you get out of your vehicle and you just want to fall over. And I asked the guys inside, how do you deal with it? And they said, well, we just keep the doors closed because today it's a good day, but some days it's really bad. So how are we going to address that issue where you're making this huge improvement? Are they going to go away, or are we going to try and do something to...
Let me try to answer that. We are making a significant and we think impactful first step improvement that we think is achievable. So the relative investment in the trails, it's a big amount of money, but it is not the biggest sum of money that you've heard discussed tonight. So the design team feels that a critical first step is to bring people along these trails. They may hurry as they pass GAF.
Oh, it's not GAF.
No,
it's the waste transfer.
Yes.
But GAF itself is also
Yeah.
can also be smelly.
Doesn't knock you over.
They may need to hurry as they pass that point, but we believe that starting the park, making this critical public access for people to the river is a very important first step for this board to contemplate and for the city to contemplate. And in our, maybe you can find the slide of Farview Park aerial, in our vision, we also have asked ourselves the question about whether it makes the most sense for the city to maintain a garbage transfer, a municipal waste transfer station right on the Mississippi River, given that it is a national park. This is a question that we out-of-towners permit ourselves to pose to you. And so there are multiple obstacles. Of course, it is not a trivial thing to move a municipal waste transfer plant, but we think with proper collaboration with the city, it is possible. We would love to see that accelerated forward as quickly as possible. And if you look, this is a little bit small on the screen, but you'll see it better in your books. If you look at this as the existing launching point of that municipal waste transfer station, and it has been transformed here into a cornerstone that would have a significant community programming element like an urban boat builders, something that would be related to vocation, to fabricating, rapid prototyping, job skills, All of those things could be the kind of program that we could envision simply in an adaptive reuse of that garbage transfer station, minus the garbage, of course.
Frankly, the team spent a lot of time talking about what was in a first phase, from not just from the point of view of the 4 criteria I showed you, but also from the point of view of what's likely possible for a city to reorganize its operations. How do you create political pressure for a city to reorganize its operations? And so therefore maybe it makes sense to have trails through obnoxious use, knowing that it will take a little longer to get rid of the use.
So I'm not going to totally spell it out here for you, but just following on what Candace said, if the public is on the river, if they are seeing the conditions along the river, and if they are appreciating the river in a new way, and if perhaps there is a Wi-Fi network and they can report things, they can spot animals and report things that they think should be changed, then suddenly you've created a whole cadre of citizen conservationists who are going to continue to improve the quality of the river. That is our hope, and that's part of this vision.
You know, and I would just add, the process you're in is turning what's been the back door into the front door. The minute the public is there, like Sheila says, a lot of things will change. There will be conflicts. There will be, things people notice, but now they're all within the public perception. They've all been out of sight, back of mind, up until now.
And just also to respond to what not only Commissioner Olson but Commissioner Vreeland have mentioned, if you look at page 26 of your draft pamphlet, you see a vision of what the transformation and adaptive reuse of the municipal waste transfer station could look like if it had a new, significant, community-oriented program.
Okay. Thank you, Commissioner Olson. Commissioner Tabb.
Thank you, President Irwin. I just want to thank the design team, the steering committee, the community. This was a huge project. Many voices had input and touched this process. I just think it's, again, there are a lot of details that have yet to be worked out, but I think it's an opportunity for us to invest in our city and making parts of our city better that are in need of some help to be made better. And I think by doing that, that helps the entire city be a better place as well. So again, I just want to thank everybody who did work so hard on it.
Thank you, Commissioner Tabb. Vice President Young.
Yes. I have a creative solution. And this is for the young people that are listening. It's because somebody's going to have to invent it. But how about these biohavens for water, having biohavens in the air that are cleaning the air? If we can clean water, we should be able to clean air.
We call them trees.
We do.
Well, we do that.
Invented, but we need more of them.
But the trees, there aren't enough trees to plant around a garbage transfer station. I happen to know that for a fact. But above and beyond the trees, there might be other things that could biologically do something about those smells. And that's all I'm saying. Again, it's part of future thinking. Bioclouds. And bioclouds. You got it. Let's figure it out.
All right.
Okay, thank you, Vice President Young. I just have a quick question and then some thank yous. The question is, you quoted $52 million to get the parkways done, and I agree the parkways, I think, are like a first critical step in this whole process. So, trails, parkways and trails. Okay, no, but I bring it up because you have two trails. You have a trail in the front and a potential parkway in the back in some cases. So the $52 million that you're talking about, is it only along the water's edge or also the farther back trail as well?
The farther back trail as well, and the 26th and 28th Avenue extensions.
Okay. And those are separated bike and walking trails like our existing standard, or is it a single trail?
We initially had the idea of separating them so that you could have a more quieter, reflective experience along the river, but the community told us that they would like to see these two streams safely conjoined so that there would be a lot of traffic.
Really?
Yes. So not a collision of pedestrians and bicyclists, but safely conjoined so that all streams of traffic could merge together and kind of form a collective. This is what we heard from the community.
So there'd always be somebody there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
And on the back trail, it's going to be working with existing roadways, revising some of the cross sections and so forth.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Then I just want to just also say some thank yous. And the first one I'll start with is David Fisher. David Fisher came here, and we asked him to work on the river from the Shears site up to the Broadway Bridge, and he did a little bit more than that and came up with this plan. So I just want to thank David Fisher and Mary, who really went with this and it took off, and I think it was an amazing success. I also want to thank the folks who participated in this process. There are a lot of people and citizens that showed up for these meetings and provided input. And so their attendance, Lauren, is very much appreciated. It's been in everything. And they really provided the information that the design teams used to come up with this. And so I really appreciate the effort that the citizens put forward. And I want to thank the board, because the board set aside resources to do this effort. It was something that we kind of stepped out on, and it's a huge, huge issue. I mean, if you think about this, this is probably the largest undertaking this board has taken, really, since the establishment of the lakes, if you think about that long ago. And there were plenty of naysayers, if you look at the history about when they were digging out the lakes, but I do think it's important that we think 20 to 30 years ahead and push forward, even though these are tough times. There were tough times before. There were 2 world wars that they went through. And we have to stick our necks out, and hopefully we'll be cognizant of this as we move forward this next year, because we have a 2012 budget, and I think it's important that we have some momentum going, and we have to keep the momentum going. The public might not be aware, but we finished lighting this side of the river up to the railroad bridge this year, and we have a grant proposal in to connect the Shear piece beyond the Broadway Bridge as well. So we're slowly moving ahead, but I think it's important that we move beyond the Broadway Bridge itself. The last thing I'll just mention is that, as this group mentioned, this is truly an intergovernmental effort. The people that help select the design team and who have been participating in this process are people from the city, the county, the local community. And so to that end, I think it's very important, I mentioned this last night, that we give a presentation to the City Council before we take actions during the public input process, that we also give a presentation to the county, because they're important partners in this effort, and also, if the mayor is not at the City Council meeting, then to the mayor's office as well. I think it's important to include all of them. The last thing is, how are we going to communicate this back to the citizenry? I mean, they all helped come up with this, and maybe Assistant Superintendent's going to talk about this, but how are we going to communicate this back to the neighborhood groups? So thank you again. You were plodding around in the winter here. Some of you weren't used to our winter, but we really appreciate you taking the time. It's a wonderful plan. Thank you.
Mr. President.
So next steps, are you going to talk about that in planning, Assistant Superintendent? Okay.